Well, thanks for all coming out. We're going to be going over the different ways you can irrigate your gardens. And there's lots of different motivating factors for wanting to use drip irrigation. Maybe you want to save money, maybe you want to be a more responsible citizen to save water. But really one of the biggest motivating factors is you want things like this. You want carrots. You want to have potatoes and onions. You want to have peppers and tomatoes. Also, you can make yummy things like salsa. So, while I'm going to be focusing on gardens, it's not going to be just about gardens. There are lots of ways you can use drip irrigation. I like to use it for our hanging baskets out front. That way I don't have to remember to go out there every day to give it water, which you invariably forget, and then they die and they just look terrible on your front porch. And you want to also be able to go on vacation so your plants just don't go and die on you.
How do you do a drip?
Go ahead.
How do you do a drip on hanging plants?
So, a great question because I got a picture right here. So you can see on the left here there's this hanging basket, and you can see there's a drip line coming down. So I've got a little faucet near the porch, and I've attached an emitter system to that, and we just run it up the rain spout, and we take it across the house and then drop down to each of the baskets. You could also see on the right, here's some potted plants. You can water those as well. Works great for them. So there's going to be a few things you need, and we're going to go over each of these in more detail. So let's start with the water timer. You really don't need a water timer, but I would highly recommend it, especially if you want to go on vacation. You don't want your plants to die. You want to have that timer there to water it regularly. You can get smart timers. They're aware of the weather, and if it starts raining a bunch, then it will shut off your system for the day, so you're not wasting water. But for drip line systems, that's not quite as necessary. These little emitters here, these are rated for gallons per hour. You get one of these big guys used for watering your lawn. These things are measured in gallons per minute. So at least 60 times more water out of one of those than out of these little drip lines. And with the drip lines is to try to be more smart, to deliver water to the roots of the plant instead of trying to spray it all over the place. So it's much more efficient in its use of water. But if you do have a sprinkler system, then I highly recommend having a smart sprinkler system so you can save water watering your lawn and your trees and shrubs.
Does it just drip on the dirt, or do you put the drip line down into the soil where the roots are?
The question is, do you put it down in the soil or just by the plants? So you really just want to have it by the plants. There are some emitters that will go into the ground, but for the most part it's going to drip just right onto the roots. So this picture here, this is a really old water timer. If you've moved into a house, you've probably seen one of these. They're very simple. They're not too terribly expensive, but they work pretty well. But these aren't going to have the smarts that you need if you want to turn off your watering system whenever it rains. So for that, you get something like this. This is a Ratio. It's a smart sprinkler system. The interface is a lot simpler because you have to program it using your smartphone. And then we also have one of these. This is just a smart controller for a hose. And while it's nice to have for scheduling things, it's really overkill. Because if you're using this to run your drip line, it's a lot more than what you need. And I've found that with this particular one where I have it on the house, it's not in range of my hub, so it can't actually control it. So I had to put a schedule onto the system itself to run itself. And that works fine, but it was very expensive. However, there's these older systems where you just stick it onto a hose. My grandma has one of these for her hanging plants, and it works great. They're super simple to program. It just needs a couple AA's or a 9-volt, and it'll run all year long.
Are those still available?
Yes, you can still get these. These are still very common.
Where do you get them?
You can get them at Home Depot, Lowe's. You can get them on Amazon. They might be a little bit easier to find on Amazon because it seems like stores are stocking more of the smart systems, which are nice to have. But if you're just running a water line for your hanging plants, this is all you really need, and they're not that expensive. Now let's get into some of the other systems here. This is what I have running to my garden. On the right, you can see a solenoid and valve. This is what turns the water on and off to the garden. And on the left is an all-in-one unit. This is a pressure regulator, it's a filter, it's a backflow preventer, and lots of times you'll get all three of those in one. One of the biggest things it does is the pressure regulation. Our water pressure is, I think, just over 100 psi. And for a drip irrigation system, you need to be about 25. So you got to drop it down quite a bit. Otherwise, you're just going to start popping off all your little emitter heads. There's also this little thing here. This is another all-in-one unit. This is what I use for my hanging baskets out front. It just connects to the smart hose controller. And this is, again, the pressure regulator, it's the filter, it's the backflow preventer. And then it just has this one little hole down at the bottom. It's hard to see because my fingers are on it, but you just put a 1/4-inch tubing in there and you just run it from there. And these come in a little, it's a set of everything you need. So it comes with this assembly, it comes with 100 feet of 1/4-inch tubing, a whole bunch of emitters, something like $20 from Home Depot. Really easy to get set up for hanging baskets. So let's start getting into how we lay out strip lines before we start getting into the details of each of these emitters. So the first thing you need to do is figure out what are your plant water needs. Typically you need to convert however many inches of rain to gallons per hour. There's various resources you can find online for that. And lots of times you'll have some bigger plants, say you have a squash or a zucchini, or maybe if you're watering a tree or a shrub using a drip line system, you don't necessarily want to go and stick, say, a 5 gallon per hour emitter on those. You may want to take 2 or 3 smaller emitters, say a 1 or 2, and then you put them around the plant. That way you water the roots around the plant instead of just in one spot, allowing it to grow out bigger. From there, you want to figure out where you want to put your main lines, and then from there you branch out, put some lateral lines, and then you add your emitters and tubing. That probably doesn't make any sense now, but we'll show with pictures. So here we have a diagram. This is our garden. We went and we divided it into 4 quadrants using some paving stones. That way we can walk around in the garden. We don't have to worry about stepping in the dirt just to take a look at things. It's convenient to have. So here's our main lines. You can see in the bottom right corner where the water comes in. That's where that all-in-one unit is, and the valve and solenoid. It comes into the garden and we branch it out a few ways. We try to run it along the perimeter of the garden just to get water generally where we need it. From there we branch out along each of the rows, or sometimes we go in between the rows if they're really closely spaced. And then from there we add in our little emitters. Those are little red dots. And you'll notice some of these bigger plants like the squash and the pumpkins and all that, they have 2 emitters, one on each side, again to help distribute the water around the plant to get the roots everywhere. Any questions about that?
Yes, how do you, are there holes in your little bigger thing that makes it go to each plant?
That's a great question. So the question is, how do we put the emitters into the tubing? Which is exactly what I'm getting into. So this is what it looks like in our garden, at least in one quadrant. You can see how it lays out. And that said, let's get into our demo of how to put this together. Okay, so I've got here just a piece of old scrap tubing. This is 1/2-inch tubing. And then there's also this little 1/4-inch tubing. The 1/2-inch tubing here, this is what you're going to want for getting main water distribution around in your garden. And then this 1/4 inch tubing, this is for just the last few inches of your garden, or if you're doing hanging baskets, this is what you're going to use to do that. So we've got this handy little tool right here in the plant center. It's kind of looks like a scissor. You see right there, it's got the punch. So we're going to put this on the tubing where we want the emitter, and then we're going to squeeze that. And then now we've got this nice little hole right here. A little hard to see with the lighting, but we've got that hole there. Then we can come in. This is a flag dripper because it kind of looks like a little flag. This one's rated for 1 gallon per hour. And then we're just going to stick that just in like that. Nice and snug fit. So if your distribution tubing is right next to the plant, you can just let it lay there by the plant, let it drip water there, and you're good to go. Now if it's not right next to the plant, maybe you're running in between rows, then what you can do is you can take some 1/4 inch tubing and you can put it on the end of here. And then you can redirect that water wherever you need it. Just like that.
How does it know to just put in a gallon?
What's that again?
How does it know how much to put down?
The question is how much does it know? The nice thing is it's a really dumb system. As long as you've got this regulated for 25 psi and you just have water running on it, it's going to drip at a steady rate that will be for that rate you want. There are others, and we're going to get into these. This one is called a button emitter. You can see it kind of looks like a button. But it's easy to confuse with this one, which is called an inline dripper. I don't know if we'll be able to get a good view of it. You can maybe see that little dot right there. That is a hole in there. The idea here is you can put your 1/4 inch tubing on either side of this, and you can just daisy chain a whole bunch of these inline emitters on your 1/4 inch tubing. So this one, the button and the flag drippers, they're basically the same. You use them the same way, you just different styles of how they work. But this one, you'll want to use this if you want to daisy chain a bunch of things on 1/4 inch. You might use this with your hanging plants or some flower boxes. Though for hanging plants or flowers, you probably want something more like these. These are foggers and misters. You can just imagine making a fine mist over the plant, so you can spread out in a wider area, and it's a bit softer on plants. Some plants, if they get water on the leaves, the sun will be magnified and burn the leaves, and that might be a little bit better for some of your plants. One of these is rated for 0.8 gallons per hour, and the other one is 2 gallons per hour. In this one we have a spray jet. Let me see if we can find center. So you can see there's this slit right here. This one is 180 degrees. You can get them in 90, 180, and 360. So you would stick this on your emitter tubing, and it would probably be sticking in a vertical position. And then it also has this knob here that can adjust the flow rate. And this will vary from 0 to 26 gallons per hour. So you can imagine this like your lawn sprinklers. It's going to spray out in 180 degrees over your lawn. And here's another mister. This one comes with a little bit of tubing on it, and this is very rigid, so if I flex it into some position, it stays in that position. So if you need something to hold its position, you'll want something more like this. I forgot to cover this, but these are stakes. When you run water through your system, it's going to want to move a little bit. So we've got these stakes here. This is a 1/2 inch tubing stake. You can see how it just goes right over the tubing, just like that. And then you're going to press that into the ground so it holds your tubing in place. You also have some 1/4-inch stakes like this. The tubing goes right in like that, and you press it in the ground. Although this particular style I've not had much luck with. They often come right off. So your mileage may vary with these ones. Now this is probably the most important thing you'll want to have. This is a goof plug, and I make lots of goofs. Let's say we got this emitter in the wrong spot. I'll try to pull it out,
Yeah,
and you can see it'll fit just right into that hole.
it's just a plug.
Yep, it's just a plug,
Just-
nothing.
Oh, to stop the water from coming
Yep,
out.
right there.
Yeah,
So you can
just
see that's now
maybe-
plugged up. And it's got 2 different sizes on here.
Oh, I see. Maybe roots, that's a good idea.
Yeah, always keep a lot of these around. In fact, in general, you want to have a lot of different parts around. Sometimes you may make a mistake, or you'll have something break and you'll need to replace a piece. And if you don't have the piece, sometimes you gotta be a little creative with it. You gotta use if you don't have an elbow, maybe you have to take a T and you use 2 of the sections of the T and then use the 3rd branch and just plug it up. So good to have lots of parts, because you don't want to run out over to Home Depot or Lowe's anytime you need a part. Just keep a few around. All these parts are very inexpensive. That's the nice thing about drip lines. If it breaks, not a big deal. It's easy to replace. Let's get into some of the couplers. You may not have an in-ground water system, so you're going to want something like this. This is just a regular hose fitting. You can see this is a compression style, so we screw this onto the end of the hose. I'm going to take this, and this will slide right in. I won't push it in because once it's in there, it's really hard to get out, and it'll deform the tubing a bit. So it's
This burner uppers.
Becomes like the hose and plastic.
Oh, okay.
so yes, this is where your hose goes, right in there, and then you just stick your tubing right in there. This is how you get water into your system if you don't have an in-ground water system, such as for watering your lawn. Or here's another option. This is also a hose connection, but you can see it tees out, so you can go 2 different ways on it, and that might be useful depending on your situation. One thing to keep in mind is hose threaded and pipe threaded are not the same. So you can see this is obvious that it's hose threaded because it's got the filter here, but you also have the threading inside here is different if it's for PVC pipe versus for a hose. There'll also be times where you want to cap off an end. So this is just a simple end cap. It looks the same. We've got this cap, and you can screw this off. This lets you make it easy to flush your system. You don't want to get dirt into your system. And if you do, then you take off this cap, you let water run through your system and flush it all out. Because if you look at these little teeny tiny emitters, they just got these tiniest little holes there. Though, if you get a little piece of dirt in there, then it's going to plug it up and you won't get the flow rate you're expecting. So, once or twice a year, you may want to flush your system. There's also this thing. This is also an end cap, but it's got an auto flush valve. So every time you cycle your system, it's just going to flush it. So this helps keep things cleaner without having to manual flush once or twice a year. However, those end caps are kind of pricey. It's nice to have one of the auto flushes on your system and maybe some of the end caps, but other times for individual rows, you may want to use this figure 8. So how this works is you're going to slide it onto the tube, you're going to bend the tubing so it'll kink it, and then we slide it back through the other side of the figure 8. And you'll want to test this out. So turn on your system, see if you get some water leaking there. You might get a little bit, and if you do, you just readjust. Make sure that's a nice kink.
Where do you do that? You do that at the end of your row?
Yeah, I do this on the end of the rows. So on the end of my distribution lines, I'll use the end caps. So if we go back to the picture and find that. So here we have the garden diagram. So let's actually roll this back a few steps. Let's look at just the distribution lines. So these are the main lines. I would put some flush valves on these, either the auto flush or the manual flush. And that just makes it so you can flush out your system easily. And then on each of the branches, I'll put one of the figure eights. The nice thing about these figure eights is they're cheap. You can get them probably 5, maybe even 10 for a couple bucks. Whereas these other end caps, you'll pay $2-3 for each of them. So it's a much cheaper option. Back to the camera.
Is that in, does it ever unkink if you need it? If you need it to?
You can unkink this if you want. You just have to pull it off and
And it won't stay kinked like that?
yeah. There's a little deformity, but it comes unkinked just fine. There we go.
Sometimes
Okay.
I have another planet on the end.
Yeah. Sometimes if you do that, well, if you do that on a hose, the hose will start to rip right there, you know, that's what I was thinking.
Yes, if you do flex that a lot, you are going to break the pipe. And these pipes are very inexpensive. They're meant to be replaced every year, which I don't actually do. I tend to reuse a lot of my pieces just because they're already just laid out how I want them. It saves a little bit of effort. Though anytime you take them apart, you're going to lose a few inches because the couplings deform the pipe a little bit. And speaking of that, let's actually get into some of these couplings. So there are a few different couplings you will commonly see. This is a barbed connector. So this one just goes right into the tubing. You see how it slides in there nice and snug. And I'm not going to put that in there because I'm not going to get it back out. There are compression fittings. This is similar to the ones you saw earlier. And the tubing just going to slide inside. There's also these ones. These are a lot less common. This is called a nut lock. How this one works is you're going to unscrew each of these. You're going to take that thing you just took off, slide it onto your tubing, push this into here, and then you're just going to screw this on. This is going to give you a nice tight fit, and it's not going to deform the tubing as much, though you will pay more for these. These are probably 2 or 3 times more expensive than the barb or the compression fittings. So just like that.
So they're going 3 different directions.
Yes, this one will go into 3 different directions. You'll commonly see there's elbows, there's T's, there's the end caps. I haven't seen any 4-ways. I'm not sure if they even make those. And there's also this one. This is a coupling. So say your tubing's not long enough, you need to splice on another piece. Or maybe your tubing breaks. And so you cut out the broken section, you take the tubing, put it on either side, and then now you've got a fixed tube. So these are good to have if things break or you need things longer. And speaking of that, another thing I found useful. Last year I ran out of tubing, the 1/4-inch tubing. So what I did is I capped off the end here, and then I just come along. Let's put this flag emitter back on. And then I just got my 1/4-inch tubing. I just got a really long piece of 1/4-inch tubing. I just had one more plant I needed to reach, and that worked for me. Just putting that on the end. So you get creative when you run out of the parts you need and you don't want to run to the hardware store. So I think I've covered all of the general layout stuff. Do you have any further questions about emitters, laying out lines, anything of that sort?
How much does that 1/4-inch come, how many feet does that come, do you have to buy like 1 for each maybe?
Question is, how much does the 1/4-inch tubing come in? So I have here a big old spool of it. This is about 100 feet of tubing. This one came with my hanging basket flower kit. And I used a good chunk of it.
So it
And-
actually comes in the kit with everything in it?
Mm-hmm.
You can't get it in case.
Oh, great.
So here's an unopened one. I bought this one. This is just a spare. There's another 100 feet of tubing. It's not very expensive. You can pick up a lot of this, and it's good to have extra on hand in case something breaks and you need to patch it. Somewhere around here, I've got 1/4-inch tubing. Here it is. This one will be a little bit harder to show on screen.
You need that 1/2 inch.
Yeah, this is 1/2 inch. So it looks like coiled hose. This is 50 feet. You can buy 50, 100, 500 feet. Again, not terribly expensive. So you can get it pretty easily, set it up. And the nice thing is, since it's so easy, you can usually get this done in an hour, maybe 2, depending on how extensive your system is. It's not very hard, and it's well worth it because then you can take vacations. Your plants aren't going to die because you forgot a day. You have any other questions?
I have a question. Robert, do you put it out in the sunshine for an hour or two to soften it before you lay it out in your rows? Because once it's been coiled like that, it likes that shape. So do you warm it up to lay it out?
Question is, do you warm it up to lay out the tubing? Yes, that's a very good idea. It is fairly rigid, especially the 1/2 inch tubing. The 1/4 inch tubing is usually pretty flexible and easy to work with, but the 1/2 inch is much harder. So you do want to leave it out in the sun for a little bit so it is more flexible and lay it out. Again, that's why you want these stakes here, because it's a little bit rigid. It will want to go back to its old shape. So stake it down, make sure it's not going to coil back up again.
Black absorbs heat, so won't that burn the plants, the hot water from the sun is out so bright?
Question is, with the black tubing, will it get hot? It does get hot. It will get a little bit warm. It might not be great for your plants. You can also get this tubing in brown, and that tends to not get quite as hot. So you'll see both options at the hardware store. You just pick what you want. And since it's delivering to the roots, I don't think it's quite as bad for it. It helps warm up the soil. I used to work in the potato fields, and it was interesting to see how fields were different depending on when the farmer planted. So if he planted too early and the ground was too cold, then they might have a smaller field than the farmer who planted a couple weeks later, and the ground was warmer. When the plants are in a nice warm ground, they tend to sprout right up a lot faster. But if it's cold, they'll stay dormant. So having the warmer water may or may not change anything for your plants. You'll have to look specifically for your plants if that's going to cause a problem. Let's go back to the slides for a moment. I've got some general tips I want to make sure I get covered. So like I've said a few times, keep extra parts around. They're inexpensive, and sometimes things break, or maybe you get an extra plant you want to throw in another line. You can quickly adjust to whatever you need. Keep your old broken parts. There have been times where this has saved me. For example, I needed a new valve for my sprinkler system. And so I went out and I bought one. This is during the pandemic. It was a pain to get in the store. Only 2 or 3 people were allowed in. And I get the valve installed, and the solenoid's bad. It's going cha-chink, 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 cha-chink. It was brand new. I could have returned it, gotten a new one for free, but going to the store was such a hassle, and the line was long, so I didn't want to go. Instead, I went into my garage. I found a perfectly good solenoid on a broken valve. So you can interchange these parts if they're the same brand. And I just swapped out the solenoid, the valve was fine, and things are good. Didn't have to go run back to the store. Again, pipe thread is not the same as hose thread. Don't want to mix those up. If you try to put a pipe thread piece onto your garden hose, it's not going to fit. You're going to have leaks, and it may even just pop right off. I've never done this, never, ever. Okay, I did it once. It made quite the fountain. It was... So don't do that. Don't mix them up. The threading is not the same. And you'll want to make sure to check for leaks. This happens. These materials are not the most robust. They're very inexpensive. So they're not very durable. You flex it a lot, it's going to break. So check for leaks. And you don't want to water during the day. Your water is just going to evaporate. So make sure you run it during the night, and you'll wake up, your garden will be happy with you. And then make sure you update your schedule throughout the season. Starting in the spring, your water needs are going to be pretty low, but when it gets hot during the summer, your needs are going to be a little bit more, so you'll need to increase it. But then come in the fall, your needs are going to start tapering off again. So don't forget to reduce your watering schedule so you're not wasting water and washing away extra nutrients and dirt from your plants. This is particularly important for the hanging baskets. Last year I kept the watering schedule the same, and whenever you water the plant, it's going to lose some of your dirt and nutrients, and if you don't add in fertilizer or extra dirt, you end up losing a lot of that, and the plant doesn't do quite as well. So you got to reduce the water, got to make sure you add in some extra nutrients and dirt that's getting washed away every time you water. There's also conservewater.utah.gov. Check this out. During the summer, they update it weekly usually, so that you know mostly what your lawn needs are. So let's say in Utah County, maybe you only need to water once a week, but the following week, maybe you need to water twice a week. So just check this out regularly throughout the summer, so you can increase and you can decrease your watering needs throughout the season.
You know, when my daughter was in prison, they said, oh, you can only water on this certain day. But are you saying that it changes depending on the weather?
So the question is, does this vary with the weather and with county? It does. And they'll have their guidelines. Some counties will have strict regulations. So if you are reported for watering more frequently than the county allows, you can be fined for that. And some counties will go so far to say don't water on rainy days. This is why those smart controllers are nice, so you can shut off your water when it rains. So keep that in mind. And if you keep checking conservewater.utah.gov, you can see what the current regulations are for your specific area. And they're pretty good about updating it every week if things change. Any last questions?
Can we back up? May I ask, when in the springtime, do you just take up your system and roll it up and till your ground and then roll it out again, and use maybe 2 consecutive years with the same layout, so that the hoses are already done?
Mm-hmm.
And then only change your plots every... What I'm saying is, can you reuse, you said you can reuse some of the tubing, but you have to till the ground, so I can see you out there pulling up all the stakes, rolling it up, and then tilling, and then putting them back down on, putting the plants on.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, reusing the system, can you take it apart, till the ground, and then put it all back together? Yes, you can. I do this myself. So it is a bit of a pain. Some of these fittings don't want to come off. You pull them out, you might break the fitting, you might break the tubing.
I
Yes?
wouldn't take them apart, I just take it from the end and take it to the end, back to, and then do the tilling and then lay it back out.
So she's saying you can take it from one end, just flop it over, and then
I'm sorry.
when you're ready, move it back. Depending on the size of your system, that might work. Our garden is, I think, 28 by 38 feet. That is way too much tubing to just flip out of the way temporarily. So that doesn't work for us. We take it apart in sections. So you saw how the garden was divided into 4 quadrants. We just take out each quadrant and then we till the garden. Then we bring back the old tubing and we put it back together. And of course, check for leaks. When you take it apart, you might break a fitting, you might crack the tubing. And again, the tubing, when you stick it into a compression adapter or a barb adapter, is going to bend the tubing a little bit because it's meant to have that really tight fit. So you're going to lose a couple inches every time you do this. So you might need to replace sections just because they've gotten too short. They don't reach the plants anymore.
That's all those extra parts you have.
Yep. That's why we have all the extra parts. That's why we have lots of extra tubing. We can just replace things easily.
If the tubing works, I'm gonna put the plants where the tubing is.
Yeah, you might just want to put a plant where your tubing is
Put
because
the plant where the tubing is.
then you don't have to move things around. You don't have to rebuild the system. But again, these are so easy to put together. You can do a different layout every year if you want. It's not terribly hard. And even if you have, say, 4 or 5 foot sections of tubing, you can reuse those in quite a few different ways. And I think that's all the questions. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you, that was very helpful.